Have any questions before we begin? All right, so we left off last time looking at kind of short-term stuff, long-term stuff, the dichotomy of the market for financial instruments. And so the labels we put on that was really the money market and the capital market. Which one was short-term? The money market. So you kind of remember money is very liquid and short-term in nature. So capital market, our capital expenditures tend to be longer term in nature with buildings and equipment and things that last longer than a year typically. So you can kind of use that to remember those things. And the stock market plays an important role in the capital market as far as the volume of the market value of stocks. And residential mortgages is in there, and right on down the list. So that was the last thing we looked at. This is the one I wanted to save for today. It's really more definitional. You'll see it in the text when you work through it. It's the relationship between a different country, a person in a different country holding on to a bond and how it's denominated is kind of the key thing. So a recent innovation is the Euro bond, a bond denominated in a currency other than that of the country in which it's sold. So if you live in Germany, you might be able to buy a bond that's denominated in US dollars, even though you're in Germany, and that makes it a Euro bond. And so don't put too much on the euro that it has to be Europe. That's really outside of the definition. I think that's how it evolved. That's why they called it Euro bonds. I think historically it was Europe that was buying dollar-denominated bonds, and oh, you're buying a Euro bond or whatever. And but it's actually the other way around, that it's denominated in dollars. So a foreign bond sold in a foreign country and denominated in that country's currency, right? So if we have a foreign bond, we're selling a bond, we're a U.S. automaker, and we're selling a bond denominated in euros, but we're an American company. So we're selling a foreign bond. We're issuing it in another country's currency to try to help facilitate sales of bonds in that country, to keep it easy for them so that they don't have to do a currency exchange. So these are just a couple little twists that we have on the bonds. Not a big deal. Euro currencies, foreign currencies deposited in banks outside the home country. So banks can hold on to dollars outside the U.S. So again, the term euro here is just thinking about money that's outside the U.S. So China holds a bunch of American currency. Okay. All right, so again, not to be confused with euros, the currency of the European Union. All right, questions or comments there? Let's see, we talked about that last time, risk sharing and diversification. All right, so one of the things that these big companies and financial intermediaries do for us is help alleviate asymmetric information. We've talked about that in different classes. Those of you that have me, give me just a simple definition of what that means. Asymmetric information. Now,
is it like just not having all the information you need in order to make the deal?
That would be a lack of information. So it's a slightly different thing. It's kind of close to what you said, but it's not really hitting the nail on the head with what asymmetric information is.
One person knows what they're doing and the other person does not.
Okay, and not necessarily what they're doing.
Knows more about the deal.
Kind of knows more about the deal, has more information, right? So one party has more information than the other. So I wanted to hesitate on what they're doing. It's not necessarily what they're doing, but the information that's available to them is kind of the key thing. And so when we have symmetric information, if two lines are symmetric to each other, they're what? What does the idea of symmetry? Do you guys know that beauty, I've heard part of what makes a person beautiful, according to studies, is that they're very symmetric. You know how different beauty, different people? So on this half of your face, It's very symmetric to this half of your face. Right? So there's equalness on both sides. So symmetric information is equal information on both sides. Asymmetric beauty, you've got a couple blemishes and a black eye and a droopy eye on this side, and this cheek kind of holds up a little on. That's what makes you ugly, is when you're like this. Right? That's what gives you the ugly face. As long as you're equal on each side, you got something good going on. All right. So that's the idea of asymmetric information, unequal information. And so it's difficult for an individual person, we mentioned last time, to gather all the information they need to make a wise decision on an investment, right? All the thousands of choices that are out there. And so institutions can help alleviate the problem of asymmetric information. They can kind of level the playing field. All right, questions or comments there? Okay, small savers and borrowers to allow the existence of financial markets. Good. All right, here we go. So we've got all these different types of institutions, and the book categorizes these into 3 areas, which is kind of helpful as we work through things. Depository institutions, banks we spend a lot of time on. Savings institutions, notice who's in here, insurance companies. Right? So longer term, they're making plans, that sort of thing. And then pension funds. What's a pension? They're starting to disappear, actually, the true pension funds. What is it, Dallas? What did you think? It's a retirement thing. It's kind of a special retirement thing when we use the word pension. And again, some of your parents might not have a pension. My dad gets a pension from his job that he was in a union for 30 years. First job he basically had out of trade school at age 20, so he was able to retire at age 51 and he started receiving his pension benefits. And so it is a payment from your company that will pay you until you die. It's typically how it works. There can be other arrangements, but that's a general concept. And so he started getting those payments. And then he was young enough he had to get a job that wouldn't compete with a union job. So he went and became a janitor at the middle school. And now he's receiving another pension from them. So he had things figured out, I guess. So he just retired last year. And so he's getting paychecks that way through a pension. And pension funds are kind of disappearing now. We're pretty much moving towards people taking care of their own thing through their own savings, a 401k, and that sort of thing. So pension funds are kind of disappearing, and some pension funds are disappearing due to bankruptcy. So the people in Detroit, you guys heard about what's happening in Detroit? What's going on in Detroit, Michigan? That's right. Not a lot, right? They cut back, they kind of flopped, the financial crisis, other car manufacturers, so everybody kind of fled Detroit. Detroit's been at like 25% unemployment. Detroit's basically in the cracker. And the city can't collect enough taxes to pay stuff like their pension benefits. So I told you that my dad's getting a paycheck well, that was funded by other workers that were in the union, kind of similar to what the government does with Social Security. Right? We kind of transfer money out of one into the other. Now, pensions, unlike the U.S. government with Social Security, actually put funds into investment vehicles. So that's why they're on this list here, is that they are a major contributor to investments. All right, and then investment intermediaries, some finance companies, mutual funds, money market mutual funds. So finance companies, if you've got a GE credit card or something like that, Best Buy credit card, any company that's kind of extending credit tends to fall into this finance company. They kind of slipped into a little bit of the banking business, so to speak, even though they're not an official bank, a finance company. All right, so the liabilities and assets will start to dabble, and I know some of you might be more comfortable than others when we start talking accounting, but we're going to do a little bit of accounting. I'm uncomfortable with accounting. That's why I'm not an accountant, right? I took my first accounting class, and I'm like, this isn't for me. I had an econ class. I'm like, this stuff rocks. And so I switched over right away. So, but I think the way it's presented here is fairly non-technical, but you do have to have some of these basics down of the assets and liabilities. Now, those of you who have had that, I know there's a few of you in here. As long as I get some participation, I might not pick on you. What type of financial document do assets and liabilities, where do we find those on? Where do we find the listings of assets and liabilities? What financial document that accountants prepare all the time? The balance sheet. Good. So you got the balance sheet, and what's the other financial document, just to kind of keep it in our minds here? What's the other big one? Balance sheet and income statement. Good. Be brave. You guys are accounting majors. You're supposed to get that, start to get that. I know it's kind of scary when you're not reading in a book or listening to a lecture that you have to branch out on your own, but that's what being a major is all about, right? You've got the income statement. The income statement tracks your financials over a period of time, like how well you did this year. Well, I sold this much stuff, and I had this many expenses, and I had profits of this. That's how much I did this year. How does that contrast with the balance sheet when we're looking at assets and liabilities? What's the time frame we're looking at? For a balance sheet.
Balance sheet would be your current.
Okay, current meaning like now, right? At a point in time, rather than, so the income statement's over like this last year, this last quarter, this last month. It's the flow variable that you've heard me talk about before. There's two types of variables really, stock variables and flow variables. Flow variables need a period of time to have meaning. In other words, if you made $1 million worth of profits, that means nothing of whether that's a lot of money or a little bit of money until you say, I made $1 million this month, or I made $1 million this year, or I made $1 million the last 10 years. All of those three interpretations have a big difference in meaning, right? On how much money, how well you actually did with your $1 million. So that has to have a time frame associated with it. In contrast, the stock variables here have meaning at a point in time. Like today, we can add up what our liabilities are, what our assets are. And if I take assets minus liabilities, what do I get? Owner's equity. Other names, that's correct. There's some other names we use too.
Owner's equity stocks.
How about for your house mortgage? What would you say you have? If your parents took the difference between what their house is worth and what their debt is, ask the value of their asset minus their liability. Equity, home equity. A home equity loan is a loan against the equity in your house, the difference there. So net worth, we talk about usually on a personal financial statement. If I add up all of my liabilities and all of my assets and I subtract the two, I might say that my net worth is $1 million. If you're a millionaire, that's what you're doing, is at a point in time you have the value of your assets exceed the value of your liabilities by at least $1 million. You're a millionaire, right? So it's important to kind of keep these little distinctions down when you look at liabilities and assets and how that works with income and other flows. So back to this table here, notice how the reason we have these three categories is that the composition of their balance sheet is much different, right? Here we've got deposits for banks. Here we've got premiums building up from insurance policies. That's how they owe somebody, potentially they have a contingent liability. If there's a fire at my house tonight, my insurance company has to pay for it, right? So that shows up as a liability once they come up, if we got a little more sophisticated thing going here. So they're collecting money through deposits. These guys are getting money through premiums that then might have to be paid out. And finally, we got pension funds, employer and employee contributions. So part of your pay was going in, whether the employer paid it or you paid it or you shared it. And then in this investment intermediaries, we've got commercial paper, stocks. So those again were like companies like Best Buy and GE that they were collecting funds that way. And then mutual funds, they issue shares of ownership of their fund. And what do they hold in the form of assets? Stocks and bonds. Here they've got these loans out for people who they've extended credit to. That's the asset now for the lender. For you, it's a liability. So on your personal balance sheet, you owe Best Buy $150, right? So that is a liability for you, but it's an asset for the lender. And then we've got the life insurance companies. They play a big role in corporate bonds, mortgages, other stocks, that sort of thing. And then banks are in the loan business as well to businesses and consumers. So that kind of gives you the makeup of these financial intermediaries, assets and liabilities. Okay, comments or questions there? Here's how they've changed over time. These are the assets. We can kind of see the growth over these periods of time on which one's grown more, which one's grown less. So if we look here at life insurance companies, 3,000 to 5,000, but we've got commercial banks growing from 6 to 14. Right? So the rate of growth of these animals has changed. This one stayed pretty level over this time frame. GE, the Best Buy cards, that sort of thing. This one, mutual funds have seen some pretty big growth. So it gives us just a snapshot of how these institutions are changing over time. All right. Regulation. So, for the most part, the rule of law in the United States is if you're harming yourself, if two people engage in a transaction and somebody gets hurt, they have a right to sue the other person and get that back. And so we kind of rely on that. If you get a car, you have the asset under your control. So if you put your money in a car versus a bank, you have the car that you can resell. Now, if you put your money in a bank and the bank goes under, you lose all your money. So the difference here is how much control the person has over their property. So I'm kind of getting a little bit deep on you, but this is kind of important conceptually of why we have government regulation. Because I like to always step back and say, do we need government regulation? Would the market work itself out anyway? And here we've got kind of a unique situation where perhaps we need the government watching those institutions a little more tightly, because the amount of money that might be lost if they go under could affect greatly the depositor who put it in there. Now, the flip side of that argument is maybe we should all be more careful of where we put our money, and we only put it in good places and so forth. And we can take out insurance policies, private insurance policies, that if the bank goes under, we get paid back our money, just like we do for our car. If my car goes out and somebody hits my car, my insurance company pays back my asset. So as we go through this course, but even more into the next course, the investment finance class that you guys come into, we're going to start to question whether the things that we kind of take for granted in the United States, does it have to be government run, or are there private solutions to the issues that might be out there for the citizens? Okay. So, as a result of turning to Big Brother to protect us, because we can't protect ourselves, we're just little babies, we have a number of agencies that have evolved over time to protect us. And so we've got Securities and Exchange Commission, Commodities Future Trading Commission, Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, National Credit Union Administration, State Banking Insurance Commission, FDIC, you guys probably remember that one, the Federal Reserve System, the Federal Reserve Bank, the Fed, and the Office of Thrift Supervision. So, what sort of things do they regulate? So what's the SEC regulate? Okay, exchanges. So we got organized exchanges and financial markets. What does that mean? That doesn't really tell me exactly what they organized exchanges and financial markets. So the stock market, stocks, and what the companies, in terms of the alleviating asymmetric information, Here we've got a big company. We're going to force that company to display a standardized set of documents so that the consumer can fairly reasonably compare company A, B, and C. They can lay out their balance sheet and income statement of each company and probably need a little bit more sophisticated knowledge than the average Joe, but you can look at those three documents and compare the company and say, this one's in trouble, this one looks pretty good, I think I like this one and I'll put my money there, right? And so that comes to us through regulation. And that is one regulation for sure that I'm completely supportive of, because that's what gets the asymmetric information problem away. Similar to what food labels do for us. So we can make wise decisions on what we're consuming, what goes on the standardized label. We can take 5 sodas and we can look pretty quickly at which one's got the sugar. If I'm a diabetic and I need to avoid sugar, which one's got more, which one's got less. Okay, so similar concept going there. Some of these are self-explanatory. We've got the credit union, futures trading, FDIC, and this one are kind of related but independent of each other. One was kind of an outreach of the other. So the Federal Reserve System was created first, and during the Great Depression, when people lost a bunch of their savings, this is similar to Obamacare, by the way, in a sense. The government forces us to have this insurance policy, and so the bankers have to bury that into the cost of doing business. So you guys don't have to hold your own policies. We are forced into having that deposit insurance, and then we're covered up to the $250,000. So in a sense, that's kind of like the healthcare insurance is way more complex, but in general, it's similar in nature. Okay, questions on any of those? All right. Well, Chapter 3 is a short one. I saw some of you have been online doing your homework. Some of you have worked through Chapter 3 already. Chapter 3 is our introduction to money. And again, I don't think there's much of anything in this chapter that isn't from Principles of Macro class in terms of what money is, why we have it. So we will wrap this stuff up today. I'll give you an abbreviated run through, kind of using more of the PowerPoints than what I did in macro class, where I tried to kind of nurse it nice and slow, and so we'll go a little quicker through this. All right, so anything that's generally accepted for payment. Anything that's generally accepted for payment. So, is this money everywhere? Is this always money? Only in the U.S. Good. So it is not money in China. So there might be some places that will take it, but most places wouldn't take it. So it's not generally accepted as a means of payment for goods or services in many other countries. In some, it is. So I believe it's El Salvador, I think, has adopted the dollar. Is that right? Yeah. You know that? Okay, so you can go pretty much anywhere you can. I mean, it was declared by the government. It's a set-up relationship. So sometimes places might have informal acceptance of dollars, and then we'd probably call it money. So if you go down to a resort town, Cancun is pretty isolated down in Mexico and fairly touristy. You can almost buy anything with dollars in Cancun. But if you go down deep into Mexico City or maybe some other places, you wouldn't be able to use your dollars. But in El Salvador, you can bring your American dollars and just use them. It's a 1-to-1. I think it's 1-to-1. And do you know if it, I'm actually not sure. And I'm not even sure if they haven't phased out their own currency or not, but it was a 1-to-1 trade-off. So there, it's money. In other countries, it's not. So remember, generally accepted, we talked about cigarettes being generally accepted maybe within prison. That might be a decent form of money too. Okay. kind of already talked about this earlier with the difference between wealth and income. And we have this, this is something you'll come to learn over time. When people have the perception that somebody's rich, that can take on different meanings. So high income people are often called in the United States. So if you're making $300,000 a year, a lot of people look at you and they look at the car you drive and the house you're in and the stuff you do and the trips you take, and they call you rich. But from an economist perspective, that's not necessarily true, because if you are spending $300,000 a year, then how much wealth do you have? If you've been spending all your income your whole life, you're currently making $300,000 a year, how much wealth do you have? Zero. Yeah, well, that's true. Good point. You have the things that have long-lasting value. So if you have a house that you paid and didn't, which is sometimes, a lot of times, doesn't happen that way, especially with people who are really good spenders. And I've been a good spender in my life. I'm a little more frugal now, but I've had points in my life where I've spent money really good. My buddy in graduate school described me as one of those turnstiles that you go in through in kind of the big fancy buildings, you know, like department stores and stuff, where it seems like your budget goes like this, Russ. It's like in one hand, in one hand, in one hand. It just kind of comes in and it goes out. And a lot of people find themselves spending more than their $300,000. So a lot of people are spending $310,000, $350,000, $400,000. Have you guys watched American Greed? That show, TV show? Oh, that's a good one if you want to watch crooks in action. And it's usually white-collar crimes, so people have embezzled millions of dollars. They do different things with the Ponzi schemes of people taking in money and then spending it and not really putting it in investments and that sort of thing. And so you get a good picture of how fast people can spend some money. And they just buy crap that they don't need and trips that they go on and spend $1 million. You've heard of hotel rooms running $5,000 a night, right? You can go to Vegas and do that. So it's possible to spend a lot of your income. All right, so stock variable, flow variable again. All right, so we've got three functions of money. First one is a medium of exchange. Store of value and unit of account. The next slide will have the other two functions up there. But a medium of exchange allows us to not have this coincidence of wants. So in the old days, imagine a life without money, we barter and we trade good for good. And some of this goes on, even here in Ottawa, there's some cool things. I haven't done it yet, but I need to. My neighbor does it quite a bit, but he is luckily, he's a mechanical engineer, and he's kind of just been a gearhead type of guy all his life, knows how to fix engines and cars and all that. So he'll trade fixing somebody's lawnmower for getting his tree cut in the front yard. And so there's, it's called like the Ottawa Exchange or something. I can't. Does that sound familiar, Rachel? Have you heard of that?
There's like a Facebook group.
Yeah. So right here in Ottawa, you just find somebody and you post it, and you're like, hey, I need this tree down in my front yard, and some tree cutter guy will look at that and he'll look at what I might have to be able to trade for that rather than spending money. So that, but then you have to find, you can see what you have to do is you have to find the right, what economists call the coincidence of wants. It's usually wants. This book is saying needs, but the coincidence wants, like you happen to have to want what I want so that we can do the trade. And then so it makes it a little bit more difficult to find somebody. So there's the other two, unit of account and a store of value. So the unit of account gives us something to value things so that we can add apples and oranges. So we say, well, you can't add apples and oranges, right? If you've got 4 oranges and 6 apples, you can't say that you've got 10 something unless you've got them valued. If you value oranges, which are pretty valuable right now because of what happened down in Florida, a lot of the orange crop got destroyed. So oranges are more valuable than apples right now. We can use dollars to measure their relative value. So if one orange runs $2 and an apple you can pick up for $1, then we've got one being worth twice as much as the other. So it allows us to create this unit of account to measure value in the economy of all the physical goods that we care about. Store value, for the most part, if I hold on to this in my wallet for 30 days, and I go out to buy stuff, can I get approximately $1 worth of stuff? Yeah, right? Now, in some countries where there's hyperinflation of 50% a month, which can happen, can actually be worse than that, but hyperinflation is usually defined at that 50% level, but let's just say 50% per month. 30 days from now, I pull this $1 out of my wallet, and I run to the store to buy my apple, which was $1 30 days ago. How much does it cost now? $1.50. And so I've lost value. In other words, my money did not act as a good store of value. So when we get into periods of high inflation, then we lose this function of money, and money starts to not be used the way we want it to. People get rid of money very fast, and the economy can soon collapse into being a barter system again, because nobody wants this stuff. It's going to be worthless tomorrow. Why hold on to it? And so you're always trying to get it in the form of real assets instead of using money. Okay, so questions or comments on any of these two functions? All right. So a couple other little definitions. Cigarettes in jail are called commodity money. Currency, paper money from governments is called fiat money. And furthermore, they don't, well, they kind of say it here, but then they're not really saying it explicitly. Fiat money is unbacked. This is not backed by gold in Fort Knox anymore. It used to be, but it's not anymore. So this is unbacked currency. This is worthless. If the world comes to an end, it might be good for starting a little fire to keep your hands warm. But there is no, this doesn't link you to something real like gold or silver or anything else. So it's unbacked currency is fiat money. Whereas, again, if we're dealing in precious metals or cigarettes, you at least have maybe some intrinsic value. If the world's coming to the end and you're in jail, you can light that cigarette and it's got a little bit of value to you if you're a smoker. Or even if you're not a smoker, you might get a little buzz before you get killed by the end of the world. So there might be a little bit of value. All right. So, probably, you know, who knows, 4,000 years worth of history, there was money in the form of precious metals and coins and stuff going on. And then we eventually, through the solidification of the banking system, the trust that we have in the system overall that we're not going to lose our money, we started to rely more on these paper IOUs, these quick little transfers of money between accounts. And then that's what has allowed us to get into the power of leverage through the banking system on how that can create money, which we'll get into here later. E-money. How many Bitcoin users we got? Anybody? Anybody ever use a Bitcoin? I'd be surprised, really. None of you? I haven't either, myself, but I just thought some college students might have dabbled in a Bitcoin here or there. How many of you have heard of people using Bitcoins?
My roommate last semester was a Bitcoin guy.
Did he? How did he do? Did he get hosed, or did he do okay, or did it just work for transactions just fine? Or
I never heard him whine, so I guess it was okay for a while.
Okay, yeah. And it's still actually okay. I thought the whole system sounded completely crazy, and then I went to a conference last spring and sat in on a session and actually learned more of the details, and it's actually got potential to work. And in fact, in a lot of ways, it might be more credible than the Federal Reserve. So there's potential. I don't know. We'll probably, maybe we can get into that later. I don't want to get into it today, but having a Bitcoin system is possible. The thing I feared was that you've got some computer techie out there that's controlling the Bitcoins. And what we learn in money and banking class, what we'll learn here is that if the government can print off money, it can buy stuff for itself. And that's exactly what causes hyperinflation, because as it runs the printing press and makes stuff, it puts more money out into the economy and lowers the value of the money through inflation. And so what would stop that? Well, it turns out there's this sophisticated, especially you math people, you might want to investigate this for even a research paper or something, but there's a sophisticated algorithm that is just a mathematical equation that comes up to a limit so that there is a finite amount of Bitcoins that would be issued once they're mined. The mining process is actually finding solutions to a math problem. And that then represents $1, so to speak, one Bitcoin, is that one solution to the sophisticated problem that you need supercomputers to figure out. But at the end of the day, the math shows that there's a limit. So in other words, the money supply would be fixed. And then it takes away Janet Yellen and the Federal Reserve Board of Governors from changing the money supply. It takes that out of the hands of the government. Monetary policy would actually kind of go away under a Bitcoin system, in theory. So it's an interesting topic, and so that might continue to grow. It certainly has grown, not just in Bitcoin, but other sorts of electronic money. That'll be financial innovation that'll continue to grow. Okay. So, government-defined measures of money, M1 and M2. So M1 contains all currency. So we got this little guy up here. All the dollar bills floating out there is one part of M1. Traveler's checks, which we barely use anymore, but I don't know what the fraction is. We might even be showing something here later, but something that used to be used more often, but it's a check equivalent, or it's a cash equivalent essentially. Demand deposits, what are those? Demand deposits. It's a fancy word for checking account. So that's your checking account deposits. And then this says other checkable deposits. So checking account deposits are demand deposits. They call it a demand deposit because the way it's supposed to work is you go to the bank and you say, I demand my money. And they give it to you. A demand deposit. So you can always turn that money back into cash, a demand deposit. All right, so those are our M1. As we add on other forms of money, we start to get less liquid, according to the monetary aggregates. So the most important thing of M1 is, or of M2 is M1. So all we're doing is adding on things. We're not changing things, we're adding on it. So what we're adding on is small denomination time deposits. Those are certificates of deposit that we talked about before. Small denomination is less than $100,000. As far as I know, I can't remember if the book actually defines that or not, but because it's been, if it is 100,000, it's been 100,000 for a long time. So I'm not sure with inflation if they've upped that, kind of like FDIC insurance. Savings deposits. So if you have a savings account versus a checking account, usually people set that up because they are actually keeping it in there for a longer period of time, right? So it's a little less liquid. Money market accounts. If we have the institution always buying 3-month treasury bills or something, then that would be a money market deposit account. Money market mutual funds, we have a company that is maybe actively investing in a number of different types of liquid assets, money market stuff. So all of that stuff is fairly liquid. If you need your money, you'll get your money and you'll get it pretty quick. And so that's why those are in there. All right, questions on that? So here we go. Just give you a snapshot of what this looks like. So $1,900 of money floating around in M1. What's that number? $1.9 trillion. How much income do citizens in the United States make in aggregate? Or roughly? 14 to 15 trillion. Just to kind of give you an idea, that is the fraction of our income that's floating around there in money. And then look at how much bigger it gets here when we bring in savings accounts. $9 trillion. This is the one that is the one that the Federal Reserve primarily tracks, is M2. So $9 trillion worth of currency floating around. There it is. Okay, so traveler's checks. There's our number of how small that is relative to currency and everything else. So it's almost obsolete. There's another measure of money that adds on some even more less liquid things called M3. That one I don't think I even introduced in macro class. We're not going to use it very much, so this textbook's not going to use it very much because the Federal Reserve, again, primarily follows M2. So this just kind of helps us see there's the four things in M1. The bigger circle includes M2, and then we're going to add on large denomination certificates of deposit and some other long-term type things that give us the M3 definition. Okay, so which one should we watch? I want to go to this figure first. Here's what they look like. Similar. We're measuring money growth, so the growth rate of how much it's growing by year after year after year after year. And so in general, there's some sort of line here that's fairly stable. One of the objectives of the Federal Reserve is to keep low, stable inflation we talked about last time. And we know from Milton Friedman that there's a connection here in the long term anyway between money growth and inflation growth. And so we have the growth of the money supply being fairly stable, but it gets manipulated at times. And so what these peaks and troughs are showing is times where we've tried to maybe stimulate the economy through an increase in the money supply, which lowers interest rates. So here's the financial crisis, right in this range. We had a spike up in the M2 and M1, trying to stimulate the economy again. And so this starts to show a picture of the monetary policy and how they behave over time, because the supply of money is under their reign, but the effects of it can be very mysterious, which is what we'll talk about. It's not as easy. You're not driving a sports car where you turn to the right and it's very responsive and you turn to the right. And Janet Yellen says, we're going to decrease interest rates, and we turn to the left and the economy does a big swing, right? The perception we get from the media is that we're driving a car sometimes. Oh, we're going to do this and we're going to head this direction or this direction. Some economists have likened it more to a barge, a huge barge going down the river. And you guys saw iceberg straight ahead, right? And what did the captain do? He's like, left, 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 and they're swinging that big wheel at the barge. And how quickly does the ship or the barge respond to that kind of thing? It takes a long time. So you might start to do it, and then after 2 miles down, you're starting to make your pretty big turn, even though you took action right away. So those lag times with policy changes is an issue that they face. All right, let me back up the slide here. So there's $2,000 of U.S. currency held per person in the United States. So where are all the money? So $2,000. How many people have? I've got some of it here in my wallet. You know, how much do we have tucked away? How many grandmas have a big old safe full of currency? And then, how about the drug dealers? Have you guys seen some of those pictures of the rooms full of bills? I have a picture on my file somewhere of one of those busts where the major drug dealers are all $100 bills, and they're sitting in a room, at least a small bedroom, let's say this, and it's got bills stacked this high, indeed. So a lot of those bills are floating around in the underground world. Some of those bills back to life by legalizing pot in Colorado, right? So, got a Colorado woohoo over there from Sawyer, or a pot yoo-hoo. I'm not sure which yoo-hoo it was. Just the Colorado part. Okay, I figured your loyalty to your state there. So, but we actually surfaced some of those dollars that were otherwise being suppressed, kind of under the radar. You legalize it, all of a sudden that money becomes clean and visible and a part of the system that can be monitored. So, and then of course, foreigners. We've got a lot of our money down in El Salvador, as we mentioned. There's other money around the globe of people holding on to dollars because their currency is not so hot to hold on to. A funny thing, when I was in India, and I've seen this in another place too, if you do bring currency to somebody that even accepts it, they will really analyze it very carefully to see if it's in nice shape. Like, this bill would not go over well in some countries because it's got a little tear here. And they're like, oh no, right here, tear. They won't take a torn bill. They want that bill to be really pristine and nice, typically. So it has to be in pretty good shape. And so again, it kind of shows how it's not money everywhere if it's not in good shape. Now down in El Salvador, I think they've adopted it, so it's not as big of a deal. But you might have to be careful with the condition of your bills in other places. Okay. Questions? Yes?
What is the money you're talking about? I'm sorry, the Bitcoin.
Oh, the Bitcoins? Yes. The computer? What is it?
Yeah.
Okay, so we just got a couple minutes here. So yeah, it's a fun topic. So a Bitcoin is a number, essentially, that represents a unit of currency. And it's a number from that equation that was solved. And with each transaction, when you go to buy something, who was your roommate's name? Aloysius. So when Aloysius went to buy something, that transaction was recorded to all Bitcoin users. In other words, the transaction was encoded into a transaction log that's permanent. And so it went from that number, let's say the solution just was 47. So number 47 was, I have no idea if it's really a long, huge number is the solution to this algorithm. But so number 47 went from Aloysius over to Colby. And then that transaction log has that 47 is the owner of that. So in terms of Colby's property rights, because this was what was kind of mysterious to me, like, how do we use the computer to know that, how can Colby feel confident that holding Bitcoin number 47 has real value to it? And so the creators of this were pretty creative on having a master transfer list permanently encoded for all Bitcoin users at one time to know that they have a legitimate Bitcoin. And so that just floats around with the whole system all the time. And so with today's data storage capabilities and everything else, it wasn't hard to keep a Excel spreadsheet. It's something more sophisticated than that of this master log list. It's all part of the program of being in the Bitcoin world. So when you transfer Bitcoin from one person to the other, it goes and places the data on some server. Everybody who uses Bitcoins has access to that, so you can verify that that's a legitimate Bitcoin that Colby owns. Before he can even transfer it, he's basically authenticated that he's the owner of that Bitcoin. So that's, I don't know if I totally answered your question.
Like when you use the Bitcoin, how do you buy stuff?
Well, you can buy a lot of things. So what's happened over the last 5 years is people have started to accept it as currency. In order to accept it is whoever the seller of a good is. If I'm a Mountain Dew seller, and instead of taking dollars, I take a Bitcoin, I have to have faith that what I'm holding is something that I can get rid of, because it has, similar to a dollar, no intrinsic value itself. So my ability to dump this Bitcoin to Corbin is what gives its value. And so that's what they've done through this sophisticated computer program. Now, a lot of people don't know the sophistication of the program. They don't understand economics, that the money could be messed around with and that this whole thing's going to collapse on itself. So users have to learn about why it's maybe a stable thing to accept. And that's why it's slow to be adopted. Because there's no government agency that's putting a stamp of approval on it either, right?
It's kind of like
just
a giant Craigslist.
It is kind of a giant Craigslist, yes. Yep. All right, we'll call it a day.